"You clearly don't have the class to serve me," the millionaire's wife snapped in front of everyone. She didn't respond, for she understood everything, and no one knew who she truly was. The scent of polished wood and fine fabric wafted through the air of Aura Couture, the most exclusive boutique in the city's upscale district. Soft lights illuminated the mannequins, the tall mirrors, the marble floor that reflected every step as if it were still water. It was mid-afternoon, the hour when the most distinguished clientele drifted in unhurriedly, accustomed to the world pausing for them. Renata Miller stood by one of the interior display cases, observing in silence. No one in that salon knew who she was. No one imagined that this woman of serene presence, who had entered without an entourage or announcement, was the owner of everything her eyes could behold. She liked to do it this way, now and then arrive unannounced, unrecognized, and simply watch. Watch how people were treated when they believed no one important was observing. Because for Renata, luxury had never been about the fabric or the price. Luxury was how you treated a person when that person had nothing to offer in return. By the counter, a young sales associate, Lucy Davis, carefully folded a recently tried-on garment. She worked with delicacy and attention, with the focused gestures of someone who loved her job, even if her salary barely stretched. Renata had been observing her for a while. She liked this girl. There was something genuine in her manner of service, a sweetness that couldn't be taught from any manual. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lucy said to Renata, approaching with a timid smile. "May I offer you something? A coffee? Tea while you wait?" "I'm fine, thank you," Renata replied softly, "just looking." And at that moment, the glass doors swung open. A woman entered with a firm, almost military stride, chin held high, her gaze sweeping the salon as if she owned every corner. Behind her, a few paces back, walked a man with a stern expression, phone pressed to his ear, bearing the invisible weight on his shoulders. They were Brenda Wallace and her husband, Arthur Sterling. Arthur Sterling's name meant something in this city. It meant high-rises, contracts, fortunes, shifting with a signature. Sterling Holdings, his company, had erected half the skyscrapers downtown. But this afternoon, Arthur didn't look like a powerful man. He looked tired, trapped in a call that was clearly going badly. "No, listen to me. If this deal doesn't close, everything falls apart," he muttered into the phone, moving away to a corner. "I need to speak with the director, the owner, whoever makes the decisions. I've been trying for weeks." Renata, from her spot, heard those words, and something in her chest stirred faintly, like a stone slowly rolling to the bottom of a lake. But her face remained unchanged. She stayed silent. Brenda, meanwhile, had already set her eyes on the salon's most expensive garments. She touched one, dropped it, picked up another, letting it fall carelessly onto the counter. Lucy approached, ready to help. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to Aura Couture. Are you looking for anything in particular?" Brenda looked her up and down, slowly, with a sneer that needed no words. "You're going to serve me?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, honey. Get someone who actually knows what they're selling. I don't buy whatever a rookie feels like pushing." Lucy lowered her gaze. A blush crept up her face like a wave of shame. "Of course, ma'am. My apologies." Don't apologize. Just step aside," Renata observed. Every word from Brenda fell upon the girl like a drop of ice. And yet, Renata didn't move. Not yet. Lucy did what she could. She found a garment, presented it with trembling hands, tried to speak of the quality of the craftsmanship, but Brenda barely listened. She huffed, rolled her eyes, sighed with theatrical annoyance, as if being served in a store was a personal offense against her. "This won't do," she finally said, pushing the garments aside. "You know what? I want to speak to whoever's in charge here, the manager, because it's clear I can't be served with this." And then, her eyes landed on Renata. She saw her standing, calm, with that quiet elegance that didn't scream for attention, but was undeniable. Brenda, in her twisted logic, immediately assumed that this serene woman must be a higher-ranking employee, a supervisor, someone with more gravitas than poor Lucy. "You," Brenda said, pointing a finger at her, "you seem to have more brains than the other one. Come, you serve me." Renata looked at her. She didn't answer immediately. She simply observed her with a calm that, had Brenda noticed it, should have unnerved anyone. "Didn't you hear me?" Brenda insisted, raising her voice. "I told you to come over here and serve me." "I'd be glad to listen," Renata said, with a serenity that felt out of place. "Tell me what you need. I need someone who knows what they're doing. I want to see the pieces from the private collection. The real ones. Not these things hanging out for just anyone." Renata nodded slowly. I understand. And for what occasion are you looking? Brenda let out a dry laugh, looking around as if seeking an audience for her disdain. For a gala, one of those you'll never get into, darling. She leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice, but not so much that others couldn't hear. Look, I'm going to be clear with you so we don't waste time. You clearly don't have the class to serve me. It's obvious. Call your boss, the owner of this place, someone who's on my level, not just anyone off the street. The entire salon seemed to hold its breath. Lucy, a few feet away, covered her mouth with her hand. Mr. Henderson, the boutique's elderly tailor, who had emerged from the workshop drawn by the commotion, stood frozen in the doorway. He had known Renata for more years than he cared to count, and knew exactly who had just been insulted in front of everyone. But Renata didn't flinch. There was no anger on her face, no tears, none of the trembling indignation Brenda probably expected to provoke. There was, instead, something far more unsettling. A deep, almost sorrowful calm. The calm of someone who has seen too much of life to be surprised by a person's cruelty. I understand, Renata said in a low voice. And internally, unbeknownst to anyone, something had been kindled, not anger, but memory. Because as Brenda spoke, as she pointed and humiliated her in front of everyone, Renata looked at her with a different kind of attention. She wasn't seeing arrogance. She was seeing something beneath it. A gesture, a way she bit her lip when she thought no one was looking, a way she tensed her shoulders that wasn't of someone accustomed to power, but of someone pretending to be. And Renata, who had learned to read people during the hardest years of her life, felt that face she had seen before, long ago, in another place, another time, when neither of them had anything. But she said nothing, not yet. Please give me a moment, Renata said. I'll fetch what you're looking for. Finally, someone with some sense, Brenda huffed, crossing her arms. And hurry up, I don't have all day. Renata walked with a calm stride towards the back of the salon. As she passed Lucy, she paused briefly. The girl's eyes were moist, her dignity wounded. Don't lower your head, Renata whispered. What you did was right. You treated her with respect. That's worth more than she'll ever understand. Lucy looked at her, uncomprehending. Who was this woman who spoke with such authority and such sweetness at the same time? Mr. Henderson approached Renata when she neared the workshop. He spoke in a very low, almost trembling voice. Renata, do you want me to say something? Do you want me to kick her out of here? No one has the right to speak to you like that. You, of all people. No, Mr. Henderson, she replied, placing a hand on the old man's arm. We're not going to do any of that. But she doesn't know who you are. I know. Renata looked over her shoulder, towards where Brenda was waiting, impatient, fanning herself. And there's something she still doesn't know, but I remember. What are you talking about? Renata didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on Brenda, and for a fleeting instant, her serene expression broke. It was only a second, but in that second, Mr. Henderson saw something he had never seen in her before. He saw pain, an old, hidden pain, the kind you think you've buried, only for it to suddenly return on someone's face. That woman, Renata said, almost to herself, wasn't always called Brenda Wallace. Mr. Henderson frowned. What? And she didn't always dress like she does today. There was a time when she and I, Renata stopped, swallowed. There was a time, Mr. Henderson, when she had even less than I did, and I had nothing. The old tailor was left speechless. Meanwhile, across the salon, Arthur Sterling finally put away his phone. The call had ended badly. It showed on his defeated face. He approached his wife, running a hand over his face. Are you done yet? He asked tiredly. We need to go. Things are complicated. I'm waiting for that woman to bring me the private collection, Brenda replied, chin pointing towards the back. Imagine, Arthur, I almost got stuck with a rookie. I had to set things straight. In places like this, you have to remind everyone of their place. Arthur sighed. He didn't have the energy to argue. His mind was elsewhere, on the deal slipping through his fingers, on the company he felt sinking beneath his feet. Brenda, please, I'm not in the mood for your scenes today. It's not a scene, it's about manners, something that, apparently, is in short supply here. Renata returned at that moment. She carried not a garment, but a small, elegant, and discreet leather folder. She placed it calmly on the counter, in front of Brenda. Here you are, she said. Brenda looked at it suspiciously. What's this? I asked to see the private collection, not papers. It's what you need to see before anything else, Renata replied. And for the first time, a shadow of firmness crossed her serene voice. Trust me, Arthur, who had been idly looking out at the street, turned his head. Something in that woman's tone caught his attention. A tone that wasn't that of an employee, a tone of someone accustomed to being heard. Brenda, annoyed, opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the first line of the document inside, and suddenly her face changed. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted slightly. The hand holding the folder began to tremble. Barely, but tremble. "This," Brenda murmured in a thin voice. "This can't be." Arthur approached, intrigued. "What's wrong? What is that?" Brenda lifted her gaze from the papers. She sought Renata's eyes, and this time there was no contempt in them. There was fear, a raw, ancient fear. The fear of someone seeing a ghost reappear that they thought they had left behind forever. Who are you?" she stammered. Renata looked at her for a long time, and then, with the serenity of someone who had been waiting for this moment for years without knowing it, she replied, "I think you already know. I think you always knew." The salon fell silent. Lucy, Mr. Henderson, Arthur, everyone felt that something enormous was about to be revealed, something that would forever change the lives of those in that room. And outside, indifferent to it all, the city continued to turn, unaware that inside Aura Couture, the story had just begun of a woman who had been humiliated by those who didn't know she held their destiny in her hands. The silence inside Aura Couture was so dense you could hear your own heartbeat. Brenda still held the leather folder in her hands, the pages trembling like leaves in the wind. Her eyes darted from the document to Renata's face, from Renata's face to the document, over and over, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. "This is a mistake," she finally said, her voice broken. "It has to be a mistake." Renata didn't respond. She just watched her, with that calm that no longer seemed like mere calm, but something much deeper, a patience built with years of pain. Arthur, to one side, understood nothing. He leaned in to see the paper his wife was holding, but with a sharp movement, she slammed the folder shut against her chest. "No," Brenda said, almost breathless. "No, this isn't your business." "What do you mean it's not my business?" Arthur frowned, confused. "Brenda, you're trembling. You're pale. What does that paper say?" "Nothing. It says nothing." But her voice betrayed her. And Renata, who knew that voice better than anyone present could imagine, knew the moment had come. Not for revenge. She had never sought revenge, but for truth. "Mr. Henderson," Renata said, without taking her eyes off Brenda, "would you be kind enough to close the boutique for a few minutes? This shouldn't happen in front of customers." The old tailor nodded and slowly walked towards the entrance. He flipped the sign on the glass, just drew the interior curtain. Lucy, unsure what to do, stood by the counter, paralyzed, feeling that she was witnessing something completely beyond her. Renata walked to a small corner of the salon, where there were a couple of high-backed chairs beside a low table. She sat down calmly, and with a gesture of her hand, invited Brenda to do the same. "Sit down," she said, and for the first time, she addressed her informally, without the cold distance. "We need to talk. You and I, like we haven't talked in a very long time." Brenda didn't want to sit. Her pride, that armor she had spent years building, screamed at her to turn around and walk out with her head held high. But her legs didn't obey. Something stronger than her pride pushed her towards the chair. Memory, perhaps, or fear, or both, which are often the same thing. She sat. Arthur looked at both of them, standing, bewildered, feeling the ground shifting beneath his feet without knowing why. "Someone is going to explain what's happening here," he said, with a mixture of weariness and anguish. "Please." Renata lifted her gaze to him, and in her eyes, there was genuine compassion. The compassion of someone about to shatter another person's world and regretting having to do it. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you came into this boutique today looking for the owner, the director of the atelier, the person you've been trying to talk to for weeks to save your company. Isn't that right?" Arthur froze. "How do you know that?" "Because that person is me." The words fell upon the salon like a stone in still water. Lucy stifled an exclamation. Mr. Henderson, from the doorway, closed his eyes for an instant, like someone who finally hears something said aloud that he had been holding in for too long. "My name is Renata Miller," she continued, her voice firm but without an ounce of arrogance. "I am the founder and owner of Aura Couture, and the company your Sterling Holdings needs to sign with to avoid collapse. The contract you've been pursuing for weeks is mine." Arthur ran a hand across his forehead, his head spinning. The woman his wife had just humiliated in front of everyone, whom she had called anyone off the street, to whom she had said she didn't have the class to serve her, was the only person in the city capable of saving everything he had built in his life. "My God," he murmured. "Brenda, what have you done?" But Brenda no longer heard him. Brenda's eyes were fixed on Renata, and on her face, nothing remained of the haughty woman who had entered through that door minutes earlier. What remained was a scared child, a child who had grown up too fast and had purposefully forgotten where she came from. "You shouldn't be here," Brenda whispered. "You stayed behind. You stayed in that place." Renata offered a faint, sad smile. "Yes, I stayed behind. I stayed in that neighborhood you fled. I stayed cleaning other people's homes, sewing hems for pennies, sleeping in a single room with my sick mother. I stayed while you left and changed your name and changed your story." Arthur looked at his wife, not recognizing her. "What neighborhood is she talking about, Brenda? You told me you grew up in. I know what I told you." She cut him off, her voice broken. "She told you she grew up in an affluent family," Renata completed softly, without cruelty, "that she attended the best schools, that she lost her fortune due to a bad investment by her father. Isn't that right? It's a nice story. I know it by heart too, because we invented it together a very long time ago, when we were two young girls who had nothing but hunger and dreams." Brenda closed her eyes. 2 tears escaped, despite all her resistance, and then Renata began to tell her story. "Arthur, your wife and I met when we were practically children. We lived in the same neighborhood, one of those places where water came one day, yes, and 2 days, no, where the walls were made of whatever you could find. We both worked. I cleaned offices at night and sewed during the day. She sold flowers on street corners and later got an apprenticeship at a sewing workshop. We were inseparable. We shared a single piece of bread when there was only one. We covered ourselves with the same blanket when it was cold." Renata paused. Her voice, for the first time, wavered. "She was my best friend, the only family I had left, besides my mother." Lucy, by the counter, already had moist cheeks. Mr. Henderson, at the door, pressed his lips together to keep from breaking. "We dreamed together," Renata continued. "I dreamed of having my own fashion house someday. I designed on napkins, on pieces of cardboard, on whatever I could find. And she dreamed of escaping, of leaving poverty, hunger, shame behind. She said that one day she would be someone, that no one would ever look down on her again." Arthur listened without moving, as if each word revealed a completely different woman from the one he thought he knew. "One day," Renata continued, and here her voice grew softer, more careful, like someone touching a wound that never quite healed. "An opportunity arose, just one. An important designer was looking for a young apprentice to take to the fashion capital, to train her, to open the doors to a world we both only dared to dream of. It was only one spot, and they offered it to both of us to decide who would go." The entire salon seemed to shrink around her voice. "I couldn't go," Renata said. "My mother was sick. I couldn't leave her alone. So I told her, you go and fulfill both our dreams. And when you can, when you're at the top, remember me, come back for me." Renata took a deep breath. She promised me she would. She swore it. She hugged me, cried, told me she would never forget me, that she would come back for me, that one day we would have our fashion house together. She paused for a long time, so long that the silence ached. "She never came back," she finally said. "She never wrote, never asked about me. She disappeared, as if I had never existed. My mother died that winter, and I buried my mother alone, without the only friend I had left in the world." Brenda was now openly weeping, her face buried in her hands. "I couldn't come back," she murmured between sobs. "If I went back to that place, I would sink with it. I had to leave everything behind, everything, and that included you. I convinced myself that if I looked for you, if I remembered you, I wouldn't be able to move forward. I convinced myself it was the only way." "I know," Renata said, and the astonishing thing was that there was no resentment in her voice, only an immense sadness. "For a long time I hated you, Brenda. I won't lie to you. I hated you with all my might. But then I understood something. I understood that you didn't abandon me, you abandoned yourself. You killed the girl who sold flowers on street corners, the one who shared her bread with me, the one with the most generous heart I ever knew. You killed her to build this other woman, Brenda Wallace. And the problem with killing who you were is that you spend the rest of your life afraid someone will find her." Arthur slumped into the nearest chair. His gaze was distant, like a man who had just discovered he had lived years alongside a mystery. "That's why," he said, slowly, connecting the dots. "You always avoided talking about the past. That's why humble people made you uncomfortable. That's why you humiliate those who serve, those who work, those who clean, because you're afraid of them, because each of them reminds you of who you were." Brenda didn't respond, but her weeping said it all. Renata stood up, walked towards Brenda, and to everyone's surprise, knelt before her. She took her hands, those trembling hands that still held the folder. "Look at me," she said softly. "Look at me, Brenda." Brenda lifted her tear-streaked face, stripped of all masks. "I didn't come here to destroy you," Renata said. "Even though that paper in your hands could sink your husband in an instant, even though it could give me the justice I believed I deserved for years, I didn't come for that. I came because life, in a way I don't even understand, put you back in front of me, and I need you to understand something. The pain you carry isn't cured by humiliating others. It's cured by facing the only person you've been running from for years, yourself." Brenda's weeping became uncontrollable. These were different tears than those of fear. They were tears of something breaking inside after years of being frozen. And at that instant, Arthur, still seated, looked at the clock on the wall, then at his phone, then at Renata. Something in his face had changed. He no longer thought about the contract. He no longer thought about Sterling Holdings. He was thinking about something that had been gnawing at him for a long time, and that, until this afternoon, he hadn't had the courage to face. "There's something you two don't know," Arthur said suddenly, his voice hollow. Both women turned to look at him. "There's a reason I need that contract so desperately. A reason I haven't told anyone, not even you, Brenda." He swallowed. "Sterling Holdings isn't in crisis due to a bad season. It's in crisis because years ago, I made a decision. A decision I regret every day of my life. And I believe that decision has more to do with both of you than you can imagine." Renata felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about, Mr. Sterling?" Arthur lowered his gaze to his own hands, as if he could see something that haunted him there. "The neighborhood you two came from," he said in a very low voice. "The sewing workshop where she was an apprentice." He lifted his eyes, and they were filled with ancient guilt. "I know what happened there, and I know why that place disappeared." The air seemed to leave the room. Brenda stopped crying abruptly. Renata stood motionless, and outside, evening began to fall over the city as if the sky itself were preparing to hear a truth that had been buried for too many years. Arthur's words hung in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. "I know what happened there," he had said, "and I know why that place disappeared." Renata felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, but she didn't lose her composure. She never did in front of others. She turned to Lucy, who was still standing by the counter, equally moved and confused. "Lucy," she said softly, "would you mind going up to my office and preparing some tea? We're going to need some privacy." The girl nodded. Before leaving, inadvertently, she dropped a small notebook she had hidden under her arm. The pages opened on the floor, and Renata caught a glimpse of what was inside. Sketches, dresses drawn in pencil, uncertain lines but full of talent, dreams of a girl who designed in secret while serving others. Renata picked up the notebook and returned it to her. She looked into her eyes. "You draw these?" Lucy looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I know I shouldn't bring it to work. It's just that someday I want to study design, although I know for someone like me that's almost impossible." Renata held the notebook for a moment longer than necessary. Something in her chest tightened. She saw in that girl another young woman from a long time ago, one who also drew dresses on pieces of cardboard without daring to dream aloud. "Nothing is impossible for someone who has this," she said, returning the notebook firmly. "Keep it safe. We'll talk about your future, I promise you." Lucy went up the stairs, her heart beating differently, and the three adults were left alone in the salon, surrounded by mirrors that seemed to multiply the weight of what was to come. Renata turned to Arthur. "Speak. What do you have to do with the neighborhood where we were born?" Arthur ran his hands over his face. He seemed to have aged in a matter of minutes. "Many years ago," he began, his voice hoarse, "I was young, ambitious. I was starting to build Sterling Holdings from nothing, just like you started from nothing. I wanted to be big. I wanted my name to mean something, and for that, I needed a first big project, one that would put me on the map." He paused, swallowing with difficulty. "I got investors, I got permits, I got a huge piece of land in a forgotten part of the city, one where no one with money wanted to set foot. I bought it cheap. Towers were going to be built, a shopping mall, offices. The project that changed my life, the one that made me rich." Renata began to understand, and as she understood, a coldness rose through her veins. "What area, Arthur?" she asked, and for the first time, her voice lost its composure. "Tell me what area." Arthur looked up. His eyes were moist. "Yours," he said. "To build that first tower, the land had to be cleared, and on that land, there was a neighborhood, humble homes, workshops, families, hundreds of people who had nowhere to go. The salon was filled with a cutting silence. We evicted them, he continued, and each word came out like a confession torn from his soul. With papers, with permits, with everything in legal order, but deep down, I knew I was destroying the only home those people had. I told myself it was the price of progress, that someone had to pay it, that it wasn't my fault. I repeated those lies for years just to be able to sleep. Brenda, who had stopped crying, listened to him with her mouth slightly open, pale as paper. "The workshop," she said in a thin voice. "The sewing workshop where I learned, where Renata and I dreamed. You demolished it?" Arthur closed his eyes and nodded. Yes, Renata put a hand to her chest. All her life she had imagined that workshop, that small refuge where she designed on napkins, had simply closed, as so many things for the poor close, without explanation, without anyone to defend them. She had never known that behind its disappearance was a signature, a decision, a man. And that man was now in front of her, married to her former best friend, begging on his knees for her to save his company. The irony was so brutal, it took her breath away. "You don't understand what you destroyed," Renata said, and now her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with something darker, something she rarely allowed herself to feel. "It wasn't just walls. It wasn't just cheap land on your ambition map. It was our home, my mother's and mine. When you threw us out, we had nowhere to go. We ended up in a single room, without hot water, with leaks. My mother was already sick. That place finished her off." Arthur lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I know," he said. "I know there were people who suffered, and there's one in particular, one I haven't been able to forget in all these years." Renata stood motionless. "What are you talking about?" Arthur rose from his chair, walked towards the boutique's large window, from which, in the distance, silhouetted against the evening sky, stood a towering skyscraper, the first tower of Sterling Holdings, a monument to his ambition and his guilt. "The day before the demolition," he said, without turning, his gaze fixed on that tower, "a woman came to my office, a humble woman, her hands worn from work. She brought no lawyers or threats. She brought nothing. She just came to ask me, to beg me not to tear down her home. She told me she was sick, that she didn't have much time left, and that the only thing that mattered to her in this world was her daughter, a girl who drew dresses, who dreamed of someday having her own fashion house." Renata stopped breathing. "She told me that if I destroyed that neighborhood, I would take from her daughter the last piece of solid ground she had left," Arthur continued, his voice breaking. "She pleaded with me to wait, just a little while, long enough for her daughter to get a start. He stopped, clenching his fists against the glass. "I told her no, that progress waits for no one. I asked security to escort her out, and never, in all these years, have I been able to forget her face, the face of a mother from whom I snatched hope." The entire salon seemed to stop. Renata had stood up without realizing it. Her hands trembled. The composure that had accompanied her throughout her adult life, that shell she had built to survive, was cracking from within like glass under pressure. "That woman," she said, barely recognizing her own voice. "That woman who came to beg you. Do you remember what she told you? Do you remember her exact words?" Arthur turned to her, confused by the intensity of the question. "She told me," he closed his eyes, searching his memory for a recollection that had haunted him for half a lifetime. "She told me, 'Sir, I ask nothing for myself. I am already leaving. I only ask for time for my little girl. She has gold in her hands. She just needs a place to stand firm.'" The world stopped for Renata. Those were her mother's words. That was her voice, her way of speaking, her way of calling her, "my little girl." This was the woman who had raised her alone, who had sewn until she was blind with fatigue, who had died that winter in a leaky room without ever seeing her daughter's dream fulfilled. Renata's mother had gone, in her last months of life, to beg that man, and that man had turned her away. "It was my mother," Renata said. The phrase fell like a verdict. Arthur took a step back, as if he had been struck. Brenda covered her mouth with both hands, stifling a sob. "No," Arthur murmured. "No, it's not possible. It was my mother," Renata repeated. And now the tears she had held back for years streamed down her face, unstoppable. "You threw her out of your office. You took away the last wish of a dying woman. And do you know what's the cruelest part of all? That her dream, the dream she begged you for, the dream she gave her life for, came true. I fulfilled it. This atelier is that dream, and you walked through that door today to beg me to save you, without knowing you were asking for help from the daughter of the woman you slammed the door in the face of." Brenda's weeping became uncontrollable. Arthur fell to his knees in the middle of the salon. The powerful man, the owner of towers, the builder of empires, collapsed before a truth that had been pursuing him for half a lifetime, and that now, finally, had a name and a face. "Forgive me," he said, his voice broken. "I know I have no right to ask. I know there's nothing I can give back to you. But I've carried her face all these years. I've tried to be a different man. I've tried to repair what I did in silence, without anyone knowing, and it was never enough." Renata looked down at him, her face streaked with tears, her heart split into two halves pulling in opposite directions. In one hand, she held justice. The leather folder still lay on the table. With a single move, she could deny him the contract, let Sterling Holdings collapse, watch that man lose everything, just as she had once lost everything. The revenge that for years, in her darkest nights, she had imagined without daring to confess it to anyone, was within her grasp. In the other hand, she held the memory of her mother, a woman who, until her last breath, had never ceased to have a pure heart. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Renata finally said, with an honesty that pained her. "I won't lie to you. A part of me wants you to lose everything you have, wants you to feel, even a fraction, what my mother felt that day. That part of me has been waiting years for this moment." Arthur, on his knees, nodded, accepting any punishment. "But there's another part," she continued, and her voice trembled again. "The part my mother sowed in me, the one that taught me that hatred is a house where one remains trapped forever. And that part still doesn't know what to do with you." At that instant, Lucy was coming down the stairs with the tea tray. She stopped halfway, paralyzed by the scene. A man on his knees, two distraught women, and an air charged with something too big for a single afternoon. And then, a phone rang. It was Arthur's. On the screen, a name. He looked at it, and what little color remained in his face completely vanished. "I have to answer," he said, getting up clumsily. It's the bank. If I don't respond now, tomorrow there won't be a Sterling Holdings to save." Renata watched him answer the call with trembling hands. She heard fragments. "What do you mean, they moved up the deadline? They can't do that. That leaves us with nothing." When Arthur hung up, he was shattered. "It's over," he said. "The bank executed the debt ahead of schedule. I lost everything. The company, the towers, the house, everything." He looked at Brenda, and then at Renata. "There's something else I didn't tell you. Something the bank just discovered. And when you know it, you'll understand why I really came looking for you today." Renata felt a chill. "What is it, Arthur?" He swallowed. "That the debt that's going to sink me. It's not mine. It's from someone you two know very well. That the debt that's going to sink me isn't mine," Arthur had said. "It's from someone you two know very well." The echo of those words vibrated among the mirrors of Aura Couture. Renata felt the entire afternoon had turned surreal, as if she were walking inside a dream from which she couldn't wake. "Explain yourself," she said, her throat dry. "What do you mean the debt isn't yours?" Arthur leaned on the edge of the counter. The man who minutes earlier had spoken of towers and fortunes now seemed on the verge of breaking into pieces. "Some time ago," he began, weighing each word, "Sterling Holdings needed capital to survive. Projects had stalled, banks were closing their doors to me, and then an investor appeared. Just one. Someone willing to put in a huge amount of money to keep me afloat. It seemed like a miracle. I signed without fully reading what I was signing. I was desperate." "Who?" Renata asked. Arthur closed his eyes. "Oliver Thorne." The name fell like a stone slab. Brenda, who until that moment had remained huddled in the chair, stood up abruptly, as if the seat had burned her. All color drained from her face. Her hands began to tremble in a new, different way, the trembling of someone who hears the name of her worst fear spoken aloud. "No," she murmured. "No, it can't be him. Not him." Renata also froze, though for different reasons. Oliver Thorne. That name had haunted her for half a lifetime. He was the designer, the powerful man who, when she and Brenda were barely two hungry girls, had come to the neighborhood looking for young talent. The one who offered a single spot, a single opportunity, to take an apprentice to the fashion capital. The man for whom Renata had stayed behind, caring for her mother, while Brenda got into the car that would take her away forever. Over the years, Oliver Thorne had stopped being just a couturier. His name had become an empire, Thorne Atelier, one of the most feared fashion houses in the world, and behind it, an investment fund, Thorne Capital, which bought, sold, and destroyed companies with the same coldness with which he cut fabric. "Arthur," Renata said slowly, tying the threads of a knot that turned her stomach, "Oliver Thorne bought your debt. He deliberately kept you afloat. And today, just today, he made the bank accelerate the deadline to sink you." "Yes," Arthur replied, defeated. And there's something else. Something I discovered recently and didn't understand until now. What is it? Arthur looked her in the eyes. Thorn doesn't want my company. He's not interested in my towers or my money. From the beginning, he set one condition: to forgive all the debt. A condition I thought impossible, which is why I never told you. He swallowed. He wants Aura Couture. He wants you, Renata. He wants your fashion house. And he used me, my desperation, to get to you. The salon filled with a coldness that didn't come from outside. Renata took a step back. Suddenly, all the pieces fit together with perfect cruelty. The deal Arthur had been pursuing for weeks, the insistence on speaking with the owner, the coincidence of his wife entering that very boutique. It hadn't been a coincidence. None of it had been. He sent you, Renata said, and it wasn't a question. He pushed you to my door. I didn't know. Arthur defended himself, his voice broken. I swear to you. Thorn told me he needed to close a deal with Aura Couture, that if I could get him close, he would forgive my debt. I thought it was a normal business deal. I never imagined that behind all this was such an old story. I never imagined that you two were. He couldn't finish the sentence. Brenda, meanwhile, had leaned against a column in the salon. She was breathing with difficulty, and then, without anyone asking, she began to speak. And as she did, the last of her masks fell to the floor and shattered. I know what Oliver Thorn is capable of, she said, her gaze distant. Better than anyone, because I lived under his shadow for years. Renata turned to her. Brenda, when I got into that car, Renata, when I left the neighborhood, leaving you behind, I believed I was going to a better life. And at first, it seemed so. Thorn taught me, trained me, dressed me, gave me a new name, Brenda Wallace. Even the name I carry is his invention. The girl who sold flowers on street corners didn't suit his image, so he erased her. He made me presentable, another piece in his collection. The words spilled from her like water from a dam finally breaking. But everything came with a price, she continued. Thorn gives nothing away for free. Every favor was a debt. Every door he opened for me closed behind me with a chain. He used me to get close to powerful people, for his deals, for his arrangements. And when I met Arthur, when I finally believed I could escape and have a life of my own, she looked at her husband with tear-filled eyes. I discovered that not even that had been free. Thorn knew who Arthur was, knew about his company. He let me go only because it suited him to have me close to him. Arthur listened as if watching everything he believed to be true crumble. Are you saying our marriage, I love you, Arthur? Brenda said with firmness, and for the first time that afternoon, her voice sounded true, without a single layer of pretense. That was real. It's the only thing in my entire life that was completely mine and true, but Thorn allowed it for calculation, not kindness. He never lets go of what he considers his own, and I, to him, will always be his. Renata approached her old friend. She looked at her, and something strange happened in her chest. The anger she had felt towards her for so many years began to dissolve, replaced by a painful understanding. Brenda had not only been a traitor, she had also been a victim, a poor girl trapped by a powerful man who had molded her to his will. That's why you humiliated humble people, Renata said in a low voice. It wasn't just shame of your past, it was fear. You lived terrified that Thorn would remind you where he'd plucked you from, that if you showed weakness, you'd become that disposable girl again. Brenda nodded, unable to speak. At the top of the stairs, Lucy still stood with the tea tray in her hands, not daring to move. Tears streamed silently down her face. That girl who had been treated that very afternoon as if she were worthless, now understood that the woman who had despised her carried a pain as great as her own. Renata walked towards the center of the salon. She needed to think, needed air. Everything that had happened that afternoon, the reunion, the confession, the truth about her mother, and now this was too much for one heart. Oliver Thorn wanted Aura Couture. He wanted to rip away the only dream her mother had defended with her last breath, the dream her mother had begged Arthur for, the dream she had worked for her entire life, sewing at night, saving penny by penny, building something from nothing with her own hands. And the bitterest irony, to save Arthur, the man who had evicted her mother, she would have to hand over her fashion house to the man who had stolen her best friend. Two wounds from her past united in a single, perfect trap. Renata brought her hands to her face. For a moment, just for a moment, she felt like giving up, letting everything sink, letting Arthur lose his company, letting Thorn take the ruins, letting the whole world burn while she sat and wept among the debris of so many years of struggle. But then she remembered something, the exact words Arthur had repeated, her mother's words. She has gold in her hands. She just needs a place to stand firm. Her mother hadn't bequeathed her money. She hadn't left her a house, or jewelry, or land. She had left her something more valuable, a way to stand firm, the certainty that dignity cannot be bought or sold, and that no powerful man, no matter how many empires he commands, can take away what a person carries inside. Renata lowered her hands. When she looked at Arthur and Brenda again, something in her gaze had changed. She was no longer the divided woman hesitating between revenge and forgiveness. She was someone who had just made a decision. "Listen carefully, both of you," she said with a firm voice that filled the entire salon. Oliver Thorne made a mistake, only one, but enormous. He believed he could use people's pain as a tool. He believed he could reach me through Brenda's fear and Arthur's desperation. He believed that I, seeing you two ruined, would hand over my house to save you. He calculated every move. But there's something he didn't calculate. "What?" Arthur asked. Renata approached the table. She picked up the leather folder, the same one that had made Brenda turn pale earlier that afternoon, and held it up. "That the three of us would find each other," she said, "and that for the first time in many years, the two women Thorne thought he had broken forever would be in the same room again, together." She walked towards Brenda and extended her hand. "An open hunt." A truce offer neither of them had imagined possible that morning. "You know him better than anyone," Renata told her. "You know how he thinks, how he moves, where he keeps his secrets, and I have in these hands something he has been looking for years and never imagined would end up with me." She barely lifted the folder. "What's in here isn't just your past, Brenda. It's his. It's proof of something he did that would destroy everything he has built." Brenda looked at her, not fully comprehending. "What are you talking about? What's in that folder?" Renata lowered her voice. "There's a name, a signature, and the truth about who really authorized the demolition of our neighborhood." She paused, freezing the air. Arthur signed the papers, but Arthur wasn't the only one. There was someone behind the operation, someone who put up the money, who pulled the strings to get that land, and then resell it for a fortune, and that someone is the same man who today wants to take my fashion house. Arthur gasped. "Thorne behind the demolition?" he asked, incredulous. "Him? He funded the project that made me rich and ruined hundreds of families," Renata completed, "including mine. Oliver Thorne didn't just take my friend Arthur. He was behind the hand that threw my mother onto the street, and all these years, without knowing it, I kept the evidence that can bring him down." The salon hung in an electric silence. And then, downstairs, at the boutique's entrance, someone knocked on the glass. 3 sharp, measured, authoritative knocks. Mr. Henderson, who had kept his distance throughout the scene, peered through the curtain. His face, weathered by years, stiffened. He turned his head towards Renata, and in his eyes was a warning that said everything before he even opened his mouth. "Renata," the old tailor said, his voice trembling. "It's him. He's here. Oliver Thorne just arrived." The 3 sharp knocks on the glass resonated like hammer blows in the chests of everyone present. Mr. Henderson, with hands that were no longer steady, drew back the curtain and unlocked the door. Then, silhouetted against the golden light of the setting sun streaming in from the avenue, Oliver Thorne appeared. He entered without haste, with the calm of someone accustomed to the world opening before him. He walked slowly, measuring each step on the marble, observing the boutique with a mixture of disdain and possession, as if he already owned every mirror, every mannequin, every thread in that place. He smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. In his eyes, there was only calculation. "Haute couture," he said, stopping in the center of the salon and opening his arms. "Finally, I see you from within. I've waited for this moment for a long time." His gaze swept the room, pausing, one by one, on the people occupying it. On Arthur, defeated, on Brenda, who had frozen at the sight of him, and finally, on Renata. He observed her at length, with a cold curiosity, like someone examining a piece he was about to acquire. "So you are the famous Renata Miller," he said. "The woman who built all this from nothing. I must admit, it's an impressive feat. A shame it's about to change hands." Renata did not retreat. She did not lower her gaze. She stood in the center of her fashion house with the serenity of someone standing on ground she knew better than anyone. "I don't recall inviting you in, Mr. Thorne," she said. "I don't need an invitation to enter what will soon be mine," he replied, without losing his smile. "Arthur has already explained, I presume. His debt, his company, his ruin, it all leads to one outcome. You hand over haute couture to me, and I forgive everything. Your old friend keeps his towers. Your dear friend keeps her marriage, and we all live happily ever after. Isn't that a generous offer?" Brenda stepped forward. Her legs trembled, but something in her had changed over the course of that afternoon. For the first time in years, she looked Oliver Thorne in the face without lowering her head. "You don't forgive anything, Oliver," she said. "You only collect. You always collect." Thorne turned to her, and for an instant, his smile sharpened. Well, the little flower seller has found her voice again." He tilted his head with a mocking gesture. "After all I did for you. I pulled you out of the mud, gave you a name. I taught you how to walk among important people, without anyone knowing where you came from. And this is how you thank me." "You didn't pull me out of the mud," Brenda replied, her voice breaking but not yielding. "You ripped me from my life. You separated me from the only family I had left." She looked at Renata, and her eyes filled with tears. "You made me believe that to be someone, I had to forget the person who loved me most in this world. And I obeyed you. For years, I obeyed you. That is the greatest shame of my life." Thorne let out a short, humorless laugh. "How touching. But feelings aren't part of any contract, darling." He turned back to Renata. "Let's talk business. I have the papers ready. One signature from you, and all this drama ends this very afternoon." He took a folded document from inside his jacket and spread it on the counter next to the tea tray Lucy had left behind. He smoothed it with the palm of his hand, slowly, savoring the moment. "Sign," he said, "and save them all." Renata approached the counter, looked at the document, and for an instant, the weight of the entire afternoon fell on her shoulders. If she signed, she lost her mother's dream. If she didn't sign, Arthur lost everything, and Brenda with him. Thorne had calculated it perfectly. He had put her in a position where any decision would lead to a loss. But Thorne had forgotten something. He had forgotten that Renata was not the scared girl he remembered from the neighborhood. He had forgotten that pain, when it doesn't destroy a person, turns them into steel. Renata looked up from the paper and directly into his eyes. "Before I sign, let me tell you something, Mr. Thorne," she said, with a serenity that made the air in the room grow thick. "A story you might have forgotten, because men like you quickly forget the people you step on." Thorne raised an eyebrow, amused. "I'm listening. Many years ago, Renata began. In a poor neighborhood that no longer exists, there was a small sewing workshop, a humble place where two young girls dreamed of someday having their own fashion house. One of them, you took away. The other stayed behind, caring for her sick mother." Her voice didn't tremble. It was firm, clear, like the edge of new shears. That mother, in her last months of life, went to beg a developer not to demolish her neighborhood. Not for herself, but for her daughter, and that developer turned her away. Arthur lowered his head, once again carrying the weight of his guilt. "But what that mother never knew," Renata continued, "what not even the developer himself knew for years, is that he wasn't the one who made the final decision. He only signed. There was someone behind it, someone who put up the money, who pulled the strings to get that land, and then resell it for a fortune. And that someone is the same man who today wants to take my fashion house." Renata paused and fixed her gaze on Thorne. "That someone was you." For the first time all afternoon, Oliver Thorne's smile vanished. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but something in his tone had changed, a barely perceptible crack. "Yes, you do," Renata replied. "You destroyed our neighborhood to make a profit, and in doing so, without knowing it, you left homeless the family of the same girl you had left behind years earlier. My family. Mine." Her voice deepened. "You took my friend, you destroyed my home, and you hastened my mother's death. 3 wounds, and all bear your signature." The salon was so silent you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Thorne composed himself, forcing a smile again, though this time with effort. "Assuming any of that were true," he said, "which it isn't, what does it matter? Years have passed. There's no proof. There's nothing but the resentment of a woman inventing villains to justify her bitterness. No one would believe you." Renata smiled, and her smile, unlike his, reached her eyes. "You're right about one thing," she said. "Years have passed, but you're wrong about everything else." She walked to the low table in the corner and picked up the leather folder. She held it up, and across Thorne's face, for the first time, a shadow of unease crossed. "Do you know what this is?" Renata asked. "When they demolished the sewing workshop, the old master who ran it managed to rescue a box of documents before everything came down. Contracts, receipts, papers that seemed useless. That man had no one to leave them to. He was alone, just like me, so before he died, he entrusted them to me. A girl who sewed hems for pennies. He thought they might serve me someday, and I kept them for years without fully understanding what I held in my hands." Mr. Henderson, from his corner, took a step forward. His eyes were moist. "That old master was my brother," the tailor said, his voice trembling. "And I was there the day he gave you that box, Renata. I remember it like it was yesterday." Renata nodded, moved, and looked back at Thorn. Inside this folder, she said, are the names of the shell companies, the signatures, the money movements, everything that connects the demolition of our neighborhood to you, Mr. Thorn. For years, I didn't know what I had until one day, not long ago. I read an article in a magazine about the great Oliver Thorn and his empire, and I recognized a name, the same one that appears in these papers. Oliver Thorn had stopped smiling completely. His face, once elegantly disdainful, had hardened into a tense mask. That proves nothing, he said. But his voice no longer had the same strength. Perhaps not in a court of law, Renata replied calmly. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if this would be enough to take you to trial, but I do know one thing. You have built your entire empire on an image, the image of the genius, the visionary, the man who came from nothing and triumphed with talent. Imagine what would happen if the world knew that the great Oliver Thorn amassed his first fortune by throwing humble families out of their homes. That behind Thorn Atelier there are entire neighborhoods destroyed, that you are not an artist. You are just a man who stepped on the weak to rise. Thorn clenched his jaw. For the first time, the hunter felt cornered. What do you want? He finally said, his voice low and dangerous. Money? Shares? Tell me your price. Everyone has one. That's your mistake, Mr. Thorn, Renata replied. You believe everything can be bought, that every person has a price. And it's true that there are some things money can buy, but there is one that it cannot. The dignity of someone who learned to live with nothing and not lose themselves along the way. That you will never be able to buy. Not from me, not from Brenda, not from anyone. She took the document Thorn had left on the counter, the contract that would make her lose Aura Couture, and she tore it in two. The sound of the ripping paper cut the air like thunder. I'm not signing anything, she said, and you are going to forgive Arthur's debt, all of it. No conditions. You're going to release Brenda and erase every chain you placed on her. And in return, this folder and everything it contains will remain hidden, in silence, where no one finds it. She looked at him steadily. But if you ever come near any of us again, if you ever try to use a person's pain as a tool again, then the whole world will know who you really are. The silence that followed was absolute. Oliver Thorn looked at Renata. He looked at the folder. He looked at Brenda, standing tall for the first time in years. He looked at Arthur, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and something new, hope. And he understood that, for the first time in a long time, he had lost control of the situation. This isn't over, he snarled through clenched teeth. Yes, it is, Renata replied, without raising her voice. Yes, it is over. Because you, Mr. Thorn, have much more to lose than I do. I already lost everything that mattered to me a long time ago, and I still stand. Could you say the same if you lost everything? Thorn didn't respond. He turned on his heel, with the rigid gait of a man retreating from a battle he had believed won beforehand. He walked towards the door, but before leaving, he paused. And without fully turning, he dropped one last phrase, in a low voice, almost a poisonous whisper. There's something you don't know, Renata. Something about your mother. About the real reason she went to beg Arthur that day. He barely turned his head, his profile silhouetted against the evening light. If you knew what really happened, you wouldn't be defending this man. Ask him. Ask Arthur what your mother offered him that afternoon, and what he truly replied. And with those words, Oliver Thorn left Aura Couture, leaving behind him a silence charged with a new question. Renata slowly turned to Arthur. The man had paled. He trembled. What are you talking about, Arthur? She asked, her heart pounding in her chest. What did my mother offer you that afternoon? Arthur opened his mouth. He closed it. Tears welled in his eyes. There's something I didn't tell you, he murmured. Something I didn't have the courage to tell you a while ago. Because it's the part of this whole story that brings me the most shame. The door to Aura Couture had closed behind Oliver Thorn, but his last words still floated in the salon like smoke that no one could dispel. Ask Arthur what your mother offered him that afternoon, and what he truly replied. Renata kept her eyes fixed on Arthur. The man trembled, his face soaked and his gaze fixed on the marble floor, unable to meet hers. Speak, Renata said, and though her voice was barely a whisper, it filled the entire room. Whatever it is, I need to hear it from your mouth, not his. Arthur took a deep breath. When he began to speak, his voice came out broken, stripped of any remaining pride. When your mother came into my office that day, he began, I already knew who Thorn was. I knew he was the true owner of the project, the one moving the money from behind. I was just the visible face, the ambitious young man he used to sign whatever suited him. He swallowed. Your mother didn't come empty-handed, Renata. That's what Thorn wanted you to know. She offered me something. Renata felt her heart clench. What did she offer you? Arthur finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. A box, he said. A small, worn wooden sewing box, with an embroidery on the lid. She told me it was the only thing of value she had in the world. That inside were some coins she had saved her entire life, hidden stitch by stitch, and a ring that had belonged to her own mother. His voice broke. She offered me everything she had, to the last penny, to the last memory of her family, in exchange for one thing, that I delay the demolition long enough for her daughter to have a place to start. The salon was in absolute silence. Lucy, at the top of the stairs, had brought her hands to her chest. Brenda wept silently. Mr. Henderson looked at Arthur with a mixture of pain and something akin to compassion. "And what did you do?" Renata asked in a thin voice. Arthur closed his eyes. "I took the box," he said. "I took it from her hands and told her I would think about it. I told her to come back in a few days for an answer." Tears now streamed freely down his face, but he had no intention of waiting. The demolition was already scheduled. Thorne wouldn't have stopped it for anything in the world. I knew that, and yet I took the only thing your mother had, knowing I wouldn't keep my part of the bargain. Renata felt her breath catch. She leaned against the counter. "You took her box," she repeated, as if needing to hear it again to believe it. "You took her life savings, her mother's ring, knowing you were going to evict her anyway." "Yes," Arthur confessed, collapsing, "and it's the thing I've been most ashamed of in my entire life. I carried that box for years. I couldn't spend those coins. I couldn't sell that ring. I kept them because every time I looked at them, I remembered the woman I had deceived. I remembered that my fortune didn't start just with a demolition. It started with the theft of a dying mother's savings." Renata's weeping was now silent, deep, the weeping of a wound opening to its depths. But then, Arthur did something no one expected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, wrapped in an old, carefully folded cloth. He held it for an instant with trembling hands, like someone holding something sacred. "I've carried it with me all these years," he said, "everywhere. From the day I understood, watching your name grow in the fashion world, that the girl your mother spoke of was you. Since I understood that her dream had come true despite me, I kept it, hoping one day to have the courage to return it to you, even though I knew I didn't deserve the opportunity." He extended the cloth towards Renata. He opened it slowly, and there, on the worn fabric, was the small sewing box. The wood darkened by time, the embroidery on the lid, faded but still visible, a simple flower, hand-stitched by fingers. Renata had watched work throughout her childhood. Renata stopped breathing. She recognized it instantly. It was her mother's box, the same one she had fallen asleep on so many nights as a child, listening to the sound of the needle going in and out of the fabric, the same one she believed lost forever, buried beneath the rubble of a neighborhood that no longer existed. She took it with trembling hands, held it against her chest, and for the first time in that impossible afternoon, she cried without restraint. She cried like the child who one day lost her mother in a leaky room, never having been able to tell her that her dream, someday, would come true. She opened the box slowly. Inside were the coins, darkened by the years, and the ring, a thin, humble band, without precious stones, but more valuable to Renata than any jewel in the world. She took it between her fingers, and beneath the ring, she found something she didn't expect. A small folded paper, yellowed by time. It was her mother's handwriting, trembling, made by a tired hand but unmistakable. And it said, "My little girl, if you ever read this, it's because life separated us too soon. Don't cry for me. I had the greatest luck in the world to be your mother. I don't leave you money. I don't leave you a house. I leave you something better, your hands. In them, there is gold. Don't let anyone, ever, make you believe you don't have the class for anything in this life. You are worth more than all the palaces combined. Be good, and when you have much, remember those who have nothing. Love, Mom." Renata read the note twice, 3 times, and with each reading, something inside her transformed. Don't let anyone, ever, make you believe you don't have the class for anything in this life. That very afternoon, in that very room, Brenda had told her she didn't have the class to serve her, and her mother, years before she died, had written those exact words on a paper, as if she had known, as if she had divined, that one day her daughter would need to hear them. Renata looked up. She looked at Arthur, who awaited his sentence with his head bowed, ready to receive any punishment, any condemnation, any word of hatred she might hurl at him. But Renata did not hurl hatred. She walked towards him, her mother's box clutched to her chest. She stopped in front of the man who had taken so much from her, and for a long moment, Neither of them said anything. For years, Renata finally said, her voice heavy with tears, "I dreamed of this moment without knowing it. I dreamed of finding the one responsible for my pain and making him pay. I imagined 1,000 ways to return the harm, and now that he is in front of me, now that I could destroy him with a single word, I find that I no longer want to." Arthur looked up, incredulous. "I'm not forgiving you for your sake," Renata continued. "Not yet. Perhaps complete forgiveness will take the rest of my life. And I won't lie by saying it has arrived. But I am giving you your peace for her, for my mother, because her last will, written in her own hand, was for me to remember those who have nothing. And look at you, Arthur. Look at you. Despite your towers and your money, today you have nothing. You are one of them." Arthur completely broke down. He fell to his knees in front of her, not as a powerful man, but as a human being who could finally release a weight he had carried for half a lifetime. "I don't deserve this," he sobbed. "I don't deserve your kindness." "No," Renata said softly, "you don't deserve it. That's why it's called grace. Grace isn't earned, it's received and given back." Brenda then approached, with hesitant steps, knelt beside her husband, and looked at Renata with the eyes of the girl she had once been, the one who sold flowers on street corners, the one who shared a piece of bread when there was only one. "Renata," she said, her voice broken, "I know I have no right to ask you, after how I treated you today, after how I abandoned you so many years ago, but do you think someday you could? You never stopped being my friend." "Brenda," Renata interrupted her, and she also knelt, the three figures united in the center of the salon. "You just got lost. You got so lost that you forgot the way back. But the way was always here, always." And the two women, separated by years of silence, betrayal, and pain, finally embraced. An embrace that smelled of a struggling neighborhood, of shared bread, of dreams drawn on pieces of cardboard. An embrace that no empire, no thorn, no fortune had managed to completely erase. Mr. Henderson, from his corner, wiped his tears with the back of his hand, and at the top of the stairs, Lucy also wept, clutching her small sketchbook, unaware yet that that scene would also change the course of her own life. When they finally separated, Renata stood up and helped Arthur and Brenda to their feet. "Now listen to me, both of you," she said, regaining her firmness. "This isn't over. Thorne left here defeated, but men like him don't give up so easily. He's going to try something. I know him, and you know him even better, Brenda." She looked at her old friend. "And that's why we're going to get ahead of him. The three of us are going to protect ourselves, and we're going to do something he would never expect." "What?" Arthur asked. Renata looked at the sewing box she still held. She looked at her mother's note, and a clear, luminous idea began to take shape in her mind. "We're going to turn pain into something good," she said. "Thorne built his empire by destroying poor neighborhoods. We are going to use what we have to rebuild what he destroyed. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Today has been enough." She walked up the stairs towards where Lucy waited. The girl tried to dry her tears, embarrassed to be seen crying. "Lucy," Renata said softly, "today you witnessed things no one should see in their first year of work. And yet, you didn't move from your spot. You stayed, like I once stayed. Ma'am, I just didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing," Renata said, "and now I'm going to fulfill the promise I made you a few hours ago." She took the small sketchbook from the girl's hands and leafed through it carefully, pausing at each drawing. "There is gold in these hands, Lucy, just as there was in mine, and I won't let the world make you believe otherwise. Starting tomorrow, you stop being just a sales associate. You're going to study design. Here, with me. I'll take care of everything." Lucy looked at her, unable to believe it. Tears welled up again, but this time they were different tears. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" Renata smiled, and for the first time in a long time, her smile carried no ancient pain, only peace. "Because someone a long time ago wrote that when I had much, I should remember those who have nothing," she said, pressing the box to her chest. "And today, I will finally fulfill that promise." Night fell over the city outside, but inside Aura Couture, after the longest storm, something akin to light began to break through. What none of them knew yet was that Oliver Thorne, at that precise moment, was preparing his last move, and that the next day would test, in the most unexpected way, everything they had rebuilt that afternoon. Morning arrived over the city with a clean, almost timid light, as if the sky also knew that the previous day had been too long. Renata arrived early at Aura Couture, before anyone else, her mother's small sewing box tucked into her purse, close to her heart. She didn't intend to be separated from it ever again, but as she turned the corner of the avenue, She knew immediately that something was wrong. In front of her boutique's entrance were several vehicles, men with folders, cameras, a couple of journalists, and in the middle of them all, with the poisonous calm of one who believes he has won, stood Oliver Thorne. Renata quickened her pace. "What does this mean?" she asked upon arriving. Thorne turned to her with a wide, theatrical smile, made for the cameras. "Good morning, Renata," he said loudly for everyone to hear. "I regret bringing you bad news so early, but business doesn't wait." He held up a document. "Last night, I bought the entirety of the outstanding debt from Aura Couture's fabric suppliers, all of it. Your fabrics, your threads, your embroideries, your materials, none of that belongs to you anymore. It belongs to me, and I demand immediate payment, or I'll take every yard of fabric from this house today." Journalists began taking notes. Cameras turned on. It was an ambush. Thorne hadn't been able to take the atelier by force, so he had decided to suffocate it from within, leaving it without materials, without the means to work, and doing so in public, in front of the press, so the world would see the great Renata Miller fall. "Without fabrics, there's no collection," Thorne said, savoring each word. "Without a collection, there's no atelier, and without an atelier, well, you know how this ends. Unless, of course, you reconsider my offer from yesterday." Renata felt the blow. It was smart. It was cruel. And for an instant, in front of the cameras and Thorne's men, she fell silent. But then, a voice rose from behind her. "The fabrics are not a problem." Everyone turned. It was Arthur Sterling, and by his side, Brenda. They had arrived together, hand in hand, with a serenity Thorne hadn't expected. "Last night," Arthur said, stepping forward, "I made some calls. It turns out that even though I lost my company, I still have friends, people I helped when I had power and who didn't forget." He handed a folder to Renata. "Your materials are secured for years." Thorne frowned. "That's impossible. I control the city's main suppliers." "The city's?" "Yes," Brenda interjected, stepping forward and looking him in the eyes without a single tremble. "But you forget something, Oliver. I spent years by your side. I know every supplier in the country. I know the small ones, the ones you despised for not being big enough. And it turns out many of them also have stories with you. Last night, a single call was enough for them to open their doors to Renata. Gladly." She smiled faintly. "People don't forget those who step on them, Oliver. You taught me that." Thorne's face hardened. His gambit was crumbling in front of the cameras, but Renata wasn't finished yet. She stepped forward, and her voice, serene and clear, rose above the murmur of the journalists. "Since there's so much press here," she said, "let's take advantage. I want to make an announcement." The reporters raised their microphones. Thorne looked at her suspiciously. "Throughout my life," Renata began, "I kept a secret. A wound I believed belonged only to me. Many years ago, a humble neighborhood existed in this city. A place of hard-working people, honest families, small and true dreams. That neighborhood was demolished to build towers and fortunes. Hundreds of families lost their homes. My mother was one of them, and I, a little girl drawing dresses on pieces of cardboard, lost everything. The cameras recorded in absolute silence. For years, I believed that pain was my ruin," she continued. "But today, I understand that it was my root. That's why I want to announce the creation of the Golden Hands Foundation." She paused, her voice filled with suppressed emotion. "A foundation that will provide scholarships, workshops, and opportunities to talented young people from humble neighborhoods who lack resources, starting by rebuilding, on the very land where my old neighborhood stood, a center for trades and design, so that no child with gold in their hands will ever again hear that they don't have the class to dream." The murmur of the journalists transformed into a buzz of admiration. Some applauded, others took endless photographs. And then, Renata turned to Oliver Thorne. She looked him directly in the face, without resentment, but without a single crack of weakness. "You are invited to collaborate, Mr. Thorne," she said, with a serene smile that was, in itself, the greatest of victories. "After all, you know that land very well. It would be a beautiful way to give back what was once taken." Thorne understood in that instant that he had lost. Not just the business, he had lost the narrative. In front of the cameras, in front of the entire city, the woman he intended to destroy had just turned her own pain into an act of generosity that left him, forever, on the wrong side of history. This started, but the words got stuck in his throat. For once, the man who controlled everything had nothing to say. He got into his vehicle without a farewell and drove away, escorted by the silence of his own defeat. He would never bother any of them again. A man built on appearances cannot survive the day the world sees him lose to someone he considered inferior. When Thorne's last vehicle turned the corner, Renata took a deep breath. The morning air had never seemed so clean. The weeks that followed were filled with tireless work, but different from anything before. It was work with purpose. Arthur, who had lost almost everything, found in the Golden Hands Foundation a reason to get up every morning. He dedicated what he had left: his experience, his contacts, his effort to coordinating the reconstruction of the vocational center on the site of that disappeared neighborhood. At night, sometimes, he would stay alone at the construction site, looking at the foundations, and silently ask forgiveness from a woman who was no longer there, promising her that this time he would build something she would have wanted to see. Brenda worked by his side. Little by little, the haughty woman who had entered the boutique that afternoon began to fade, and in her place returned someone many thought lost, the generous girl, the one who shared her bread. She began giving workshops to the young women at the center, teaching them sewing, but also something more valuable: never to be ashamed of their origins. The day I stopped running from who I was, she confessed to Renata one afternoon. While arranging fabrics in the workshop, I finally started to live. Renata looked at her and smiled, knowing that her true friend had returned to stay. Mr. Henderson, the old tailor, was appointed headmaster of the new center. The man who had carried the pain of his deceased brother for years found in every young person learning to sew a way to honor his memory. He said, with a laugh, that he had never felt as young as he did now, surrounded by new hands and newly born dreams. And Lucy flourished. Under Renata's tutelage, her uncertain sketches transformed into firm, luminous designs, full of an unteachable sensibility. Sometime later, when Ara Couture presented its new collection, one of Lucy's pieces opened the show. The girl who had once been told she wasn't even fit to staff a store watched her creation walk the runway to applause. That night, backstage, Lucy sought Renata with tear-filled eyes. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did for me," she said. Renata took her hands, the same hands she had seen tremble with shame that first afternoon. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Pay it forward. Someday, when you have much, you will find someone who has nothing, and you will remember this moment. That will be my greatest reward." Lucy nodded, unable to speak. Time passed. The Golden Hands Foundation grew more than anyone had imagined. The vocational center, built on the ground of the old neighborhood, filled with laughter, sewing machines, young people who arrived with nothing and left with a trade and something even more important, the certainty of their worth. And in the heart of that center, in a small display case by the entrance, Renata placed an object, not a jewel, not an award, but a small, worn wooden sewing box with a flower embroidered on the lid, and next to it, framed, a mother's note. Every young person entering the center read those words as they passed. "In your hands, there is gold. Don't let anyone, ever, make you believe you don't have the class for anything in this life." One afternoon, with the center fully operational, Renata stood alone in front of that display case. Outside, the sun was slowly setting, painting the windows golden. Inside, the hum of machines, young voices, the life that had been born from the place where everything had once been destroyed, could be heard. Renata placed her hand on the glass, right above her mother's box. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "You were right. You were always right. There was gold in my hands, and look how many hands it has become." She closed her eyes for an instant, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the weight of the past on her shoulders. Instead, she felt something warm and light, like an invisible hand resting on hers. The hand of a woman who had given everything she had for her daughter's dream. A woman who, though no longer present, now lived in every young person who learned that their origin was not a shame, but a root. That woman who was once humiliated in a boutique, who was told she didn't have the class, had understood everything. She had understood that true wealth was never in fine fabrics, nor in empires. It was always in what we carry inside and choose to give to others. And as the evening light filled the vocational center built on the ruins of her pain, Renata Miller smiled. A clean, complete smile, without shadows, because she had turned the deepest wound of her life into the most beautiful gift for those who would come after. And that, no powerful man could ever take away from her.